Hey guys, what's up? It's Scott Clark with Scooter Media, and today we're going to go through the steps it takes to get an excellent looking image that has been green screened. I'm going to provide 5 tips on how to properly key a subject using a green screen, the tools needed, how to light the scene, how to set up the camera, and how to edit it in post. Pretty much every Hollywood movie uses this technique at some point or another, and it is a skill that can really up the production value of your videos. Alright, that's better. On this channel, we provide filmmaking tutorials and tips and tricks, as well as doing some product reviews. So if you are new here, please consider subscribing. Let's get into it. The technical term for filming with a green screen is Chroma-key, and the definition is a technique by which a block of a particular color, often blue or green, in a video image can be replaced either by another color or image, enabling, for example, a weather forecaster to appear against a background of a computer-generated weather map. There are a few tips that can really help to make chroma keying easier and to get you excellent results. There are also some items that you need to accomplish this, and obviously the first thing you're going to need is a green screen. So tip number 1 is to make sure you have a green screen. A blue or green screen will work best as they are the furthest colors from skin tones, and therefore when the subject is a person, it is best to use these colors. Just make sure that if you are using a green screen that the person isn't wearing anything green, and if it's a blue screen, make sure they aren't wearing anything blue or else those sections will be keyed out as well. Usually here, bigger is better to fit the subject in front of the green screen with room to be able to move around or to capture a head-to-toe image of a person. For today's example, I'll be using the Westcott fabric green screen, which is 9 feet by 10 feet, and it's hanging on this backdrop support system. One of the first steps we need to do with the fabric green screen is to make sure there are no wrinkles in the material. To do this, I'm using some cheap spring clamps that I bought on Amazon and attaching the fabric to the side poles to tighten the fabric and eliminate wrinkles. If there are any wrinkles in the material, it will make it much more difficult to cleanly remove our background. I will provide links to purchase all the items we are using today in the description below. Tip number 2 is to properly light the green screen, and this is a very important step in the process. You need to have even lighting over the entire green screen, no uneven areas or more light on one side or the other, and no shadows. This can be achieved using a 2-point lighting setup, and I'm using 2 GVM 50RS lights to point at the green screen, and I have them at the same distance from the green screen as well as the same height. This may take some time and fine-tuning to get it right, but ultimately you want to make sure the green screen is evenly lit and no shadows when the subject stands in front of it. Now that we have our green screen properly lit, tip number 3 is to place and light the subject in front of our green screen. The first thing we want to do is place our subject as far away from the green screen as possible to reduce the amount of spill on the subject. This is a common mistake that I see beginners make all the time. They place the subject right in front of the green screen, and when they try and remove the background in post, the subject face is green or their shoulders and hair are green, which makes keying the subject much more difficult. This is easily avoidable by having the subject stand 4 to 6 feet away from the green screen. This will also help to avoid having those pesky shadows showing up behind the subject. Now that we have our subject placed as far away as possible, it's time to light the subject. Before we set up the lights on our subject though, it's important to know what our end result is supposed to look like and to match the scene accordingly. If our shot is going to be outside and lit by the sun, but we light our person inside using a cool light, it isn't going to match the scene. Ideally, you want to use a 3-point lighting setup if possible, using a key light to light your subject at 20 to 45 degrees to the side of the subject, a hair light to help separate your subject from the background that is placed above and a little bit behind the subject to highlight the hair and shoulder areas, and finally a fill light to help reduce the shadows on the other side of the subject. However, for today's example, I'm just going to use 2 lights. I'm going to use the main key light, and I'm also just going to use the hair light placed a little bit behind me on the opposite side. Now that we have our subject placed and lit properly, it is time for tip number 4, and that is to set up the camera and shoot our subject. There are a few tips in this section that will help to improve our ability to key out the green with the best results, and the first tip is to use a tripod. Using a tripod will ensure that we have a stationary camera, which will make it easier to key. The next tip is to increase the shutter speed on your camera. The general rule when filming cinematic footage is to use the 180-degree shutter rule, which means the shutter speed should be double the frame rate, and this will provide the motion blur that we're used to seeing in real life as well as in the movies. In this case though, the motion blur might make it hard to get the results we want when keying out the green. Instead, increase the shutter speed to 1/80 or 1/100 to help remove the motion blur. Then we want to increase the aperture on the camera. Again, when filming cinematic footage, we generally try and keep the aperture as low as possible, like an f1.4 to 2.8, to produce an image with lots of depth of field and a blurry background. Here we don't want the depth of field to be too shallow, so by increasing the aperture to f4 or f5.6, it will again make keying our subject a little easier. Okay, we've filmed our subject in front of the green screen, and now it's time for the fifth and final tip, and that is chroma keying it in post. For today's example, I'll be using Adobe Premiere Pro, but After Effects, Final Cut Pro, and a number of other video editing platforms offer this as well. So inside Premiere Pro, the first thing we're going to do is place the replacement footage on track 1, and then place our green screen footage above it on track 2. I'm just going to toggle the replacement footage off on track 1 just for now, but we'll come back to that. Then we'll go over to the Effects tab and search for Ultra Key. Now drag the Ultra Key effect onto the green screen footage. Next, you're going to grab the Key Color Selection tool and click anywhere on the green screen to select the color we want to remove. And as you can see, Premiere Pro does a pretty good job in one click of removing the green, but we can still fine-tune it to get it looking better. To do this, we'll first go to Matte Generation and toggle the arrow to open the rest of the options. Before we adjust any of the options in here though, let's first go up and change our output view to Alpha Channel View, which will give us an easier way to visualize the changes that need to be made to clean up our image. We want our subject to be completely white and filled in, and our background where the green screen was to be completely black in this view. If we adjust the transparency, it helps to clean up our image and background, but if we push it too far, we lose information on our subject. Then we will adjust the highlights and shadows, and already our image is getting better. The tolerance will help to define the edges and the key strength. Pedestal will help to remove the background around the edges of the subject. And when doing these adjustments, it will help to go back and check your image back in composite view to visually see what it looks like when we fine-tune things, and it's always nice to go back and forth from the two different views. Well, our image is looking much better now. If your image isn't looking perfect yet, don't worry, as we have a few more adjustments to make. Now go to Matte Cleanup and toggle the arrow to open the rest of the options. The Matte Cleanup section affects the edges of your image and is a great way to fine-tune the rest of the image. The choke will tighten the edges of your subject and is great to remove any small green lines, but if pushed too far, will destruct the subject. We are left with some pretty hard edges on our subject, and the next option, Soften, will help to soften the edges a bit. Contrast and Midpoint will help to clean up any remaining issues with our key, so adjust the sliders till satisfied with the image. I'm just going to toggle the track 1 background footage on now, just so we get an idea of what our subject looks like with the background footage. The next section is Spill Suppression, and this is to clean up any green that may have reflected or spilled onto our subject from the green screen. In here, you can desaturate and tint the spill until you're happy with the end result and it matches the scene that we're placing our subject in. If the image doesn't quite match the background perfectly, we may need to color correct our image a little bit just to match it better and to ensure that our audience believes in the scene. Here's what our final image looks like. And that is 5 tips on how to chroma key. If you found value in this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing, as it really does help the YouTube algorithm to push my videos to a larger audience. Thanks for watching today's video, I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.